The law said marry a stranger in 7 days or lose everything. Caleb Vance thought he could survive anything the frontier threw at him. Drought, thieves, blood feuds. But this was different. When Eliza Rowan stepped off that dusty coach with nothing but a suitcase and eyes that cut right through him, he knew his life was about to change in ways no weapon or weather ever could. One ultimatum, 2 strangers. 7 days to decide if survival was worth the cost. If you want to see how far grit and fire can take 2 people who refuse to break, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The sun hung low over Red Mesa Valley like a hammer waiting to drop. Caleb Vance stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching the dust devil spin itself out near the cattle pens. His hands were wrapped around a tin cup of coffee gone cold an hour ago. But he didn't drink and he didn't move. He just stared at the horizon, jaw tight, shoulders squared against the weight of what was coming. Behind him, the door creaked open. Boot heels on wood. You gonna stand there all day like a scarecrow, or you gonna tell me what's eating you? Caleb didn't turn. Nothing to tell, Hank. Hank Mercer was older by 15 years, grayer by twice that, and had been working the ranch since Caleb's father was still alive. He stepped up beside Caleb and squinted into the distance. Bull, you've been wound tight as a spring since you got back from town yesterday. Caleb set the cup down on the porch rail. His knuckles were scarred, fingers thick from years of rope and hammer and rain. Garrett stopped me outside the land office. Garrett, Hank spat into the dirt. That's Snake. What do you want? To remind me the new territorial law takes effect in 6 days. Hank frowned. What law? Caleb's voice went flat. Any landowner with more than 300 acres who isn't married has to take a bride within 30 days of the statute passing, or the land gets redistributed to qualified settlers. They passed it last month. I've got 7 days left. Hank's face went slack. Caleb, that's insane. They can, and they will. Caleb turned now, and the look in his eyes was hard enough to cut glass. Garrett's already got buyers lined up. Probably promised them a cut if they push me out. He's been circling this place like a buzzard for 2 years. So what are you going to do? Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked past Hank, past the house, out to the stretch of land that had cost him everything, his youth, his sweat, his blood. His father had died breaking this ground. Caleb had buried him out near the northern fence line, under a cottonwood that barely grew. And now some politician in a clean suit 300 miles away had decided it wasn't his anymore unless he put a ring on someone's finger. I'm going to follow the damn law, Caleb said finally. Because if I don't, I lose everything. Hank stared at him. You serious? You're just gonna, what, marry some random woman? I don't have a choice. Everyone's got a choice. Caleb's voice dropped to something colder. Not when the choice is lose your land or swallow your pride. I'll swallow. Hank shook his head slowly, disbelief and pity mixing in his weathered face. You don't even know anyone, Caleb. You've been so buried in this ranch you haven't looked at a woman in, hell, I don't even know how long. Doesn't matter, there's a registry in town. Women who need a situation. I'll pick one. Pick one. Hank said it like the words tasted bad. Like you're buying a horse. It's a transaction, Hank, that's all it is. You keep telling yourself that. Caleb grabbed his hat off the post and pulled it low over his eyes. I'm riding into town. Hold things down here. Caleb, but he was already walking toward the stables, shoulders set, boots kicking up dust with every step. The town of Red Mesa wasn't much. A main street lined with wooden storefronts, a saloon that smelled like sweat and whiskey, a general store, a land office, and a church that only saw use on Sundays. Caleb rode in just past noon, tying his horse outside the land office where a hand-painted sign read, Territorial Marriage Registry. Inquire within. He stood there for a long moment, staring at that sign like it was a noose. Then he pushed the door open. Inside, a clerk sat behind a desk cluttered with papers and ink pots. The man looked up, adjusted his spectacles, and gave Caleb a thin smile. Help you? I'm here about the registry. The clerk's smile widened. Ah, yes, quite a few gentlemen have come through this week. The law has been motivating. He pulled out a ledger, flipping through pages. Name? Caleb Vance. The clerk paused, glancing up. Vance, you own the big spread north of here, don't you? I do. Well then. The clerk licked his thumb, turned a page. Let's see what we have available. There are currently 11 women registered. Most are from back east. Widows, a few spinsters, some whose families couldn't support them anymore. All vetted, all willing. Caleb's stomach turned, but he kept his face stone. I don't need their life stories. Just someone who can sign a paper and keep a house. The clerk raised an eyebrow. Practical. I like that. He ran his finger down a column of names. There's a widow from Ohio, 32, experienced in... Next. A school teacher, 26, comes highly... Next. The clerk hesitated. There's one more. Just came in 2 days ago. Eliza Rowan, 28. No references, no family listed. Came in on the coach from Kansas. Didn't say much, but she signed the registry herself. Most of the others had someone sign for them. Caleb leaned forward slightly. What's her situation? Don't know. She didn't offer and I didn't ask. But she's here, she's legal, and she's available. Where is she now? Boarding house on the edge of town, Mrs. Calloway's place. Caleb straightened. I'll take her. The clerk blinked. Don't you want to meet her first? No. Mr. Vance, I understand you're under time pressure, but draw up the papers. I'll bring her in tomorrow to sign. We'll marry the day after. The clerk opened his mouth, closed it, then shrugged. Your funeral. Caleb didn't respond. He turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. Autumn. Mrs. Calloway's boarding house sat at the end of a narrow side street, a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Caleb knocked twice, and a heavy-set woman with flour on her apron answered. Help you? I'm looking for Eliza Rowan. The woman's eyes narrowed. You law? No, I'm the man she's going to marry. Mrs. Calloway studied him for a long beat, then stepped aside. Upstairs, second door on the left. Don't make a mess. Caleb climbed the narrow staircase, boots creaking on the old wood. He stopped in front of the second door, raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What the hell was he doing? He knocked. Come in. The voice was calm, steady, no fear in it. Caleb opened the door. The room was small, barely large enough for a bed, a chair, and a washstand. Sitting on the edge of the bed was a woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, sharp cheekbones, and eyes the color of river stone. She wore a plain gray dress, mended at the sleeves, and her hands were folded in her lap. She didn't stand when he entered. She just looked at him. You're Caleb Vance, she said. I am. I've heard the name. You own the ranch north of here. That's right. She tilted her head slightly, studying him the way a carpenter studies wood before cutting it. And you're here because the law says you need a wife, or they take your land. He didn't flinch. Yes. So you went to the registry, picked a name, and now you're here to make sure I'm not broken. Caleb's jaw tightened. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She stood then, and he realized she was taller than he'd expected. Maybe 5'8", strong-shouldered, with a posture that didn't bend. Let me save us both some time. I'm not here because I have better options. I don't. I'm here because this is the only door still open, and I'm practical enough to walk through it. If you're looking for someone who'll smile pretty and keep quiet, keep looking. But if you need someone who can work, who won't fall apart when things get hard, and who won't ask you for things you can't give, then I'll do. Caleb stared at her. He'd expected fear, maybe desperation. What he got was a woman who looked him dead in the eye and laid out terms like she was negotiating a cattle deal. I don't need pretty, he said slowly. I need someone who won't be a burden. Then we're agreed, he nodded. We sign tomorrow. Marry the day after. You'll live at the ranch. There's a room. You'll have your own space. And what do you expect from me? Keep the house. Cook if you can. Stay out of my way otherwise. Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Out of your way. Got it. I mean it. This isn't... He stopped, searching for the words. This isn't a real marriage. It's a legal fix. Nothing more. Eliza crossed her arms. Good. Because I'm not interested in playing house with a stranger who picked me out of a book. Caleb felt something twist in his chest. Anger, maybe, or respect. He wasn't sure. We understand each other, then. Seems like it. He turned toward the door, then paused. One more thing. If you can't handle the ranch, if you decide to leave, I won't stop you. But you do it clean. No drama. Eliza's eyes hardened just a fraction. I don't run. Not from anything. Caleb looked at her one last time, nodded, and walked out. 2 days later, they stood in front of a circuit judge in the same land office where Caleb had first seen her name. The ceremony took 4 minutes. There were no flowers, no guests, no vows beyond the legal minimum. Eliza wore the same gray dress. Caleb wore his work clothes, hat in hand. When the judge told him to kiss the bride, Caleb just shook her hand. The judge shrugged. Good enough? You're married. Congratulations. Caleb signed the certificate. Eliza signed below him, her handwriting small and precise. The clerk stamped it, filed it, and handed Caleb a copy. Welcome to matrimony, the clerk said dryly. Caleb folded the paper and shoved it into his coat pocket. He looked at Eliza. Wagons outside. She nodded, picked up her suitcase, and followed him out into the sun. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Caleb drove the wagon, reins loose in his hands, eyes on the road. Eliza sat beside him, back straight, hands folded in her lap. The only sound was the creak of the wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. Finally, after nearly an hour, Eliza spoke. How long have you had the ranch? 10 years. Took it over when my father died. You run it alone? I've got 4 men. Hank's the foreman. Good people. They'll leave you alone if you leave them alone. She nodded. What happened to your mother? Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. She left when I was 12. Couldn't handle the isolation. Eliza was quiet for a moment. I see. What about you? What about me? The clerk said you had no family listed. I don't. Dead? Most of them. She paused. The rest might as well be. Caleb glanced at her, but she was staring straight ahead, expression unreadable. He didn't push. He didn't want to know. This was a transaction. Nothing more. The ranch came into view as the sun started its descent. Fences stretching out toward the hills, cattle grazing in the distance, the house sitting solid and square against the landscape. It wasn't much, but it was his. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the front of the house and climbed down. Eliza followed, suitcase in hand. Hank came out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped when he saw her, eyes widening slightly. Caleb gestured toward him. Eliza, this is Hank. Hank, this is my wife. Hank recovered quickly, nodding. Ma'am. Eliza's fine. Hank glanced at Caleb, then back at her. Well, welcome. Thank you. Caleb opened the front door and led her inside. The house was plain, wood floors, a stone fireplace, a table and chairs in the main room, a small kitchen off to the side. It smelled like coffee and dust and leather. Your room's upstairs, Caleb said. First door on the right. There's a bed, a dresser. If you need anything else, let me know. Eliza looked around slowly, taking it all in. It's fine. Dinner's at 6. We eat together, but I'm usually back out after. Understood. Caleb hesitated, then nodded toward the stairs. I'll let you settle in. Eliza picked up her suitcase and climbed the stairs without another word. That first night, they ate in silence. Hank had cooked beans, salt pork, cornbread. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling. Eliza ate without complaint, methodical and efficient, like someone used to not wasting food. After dinner, Caleb stood. I've got work to finish. At night? Fence line needs checking. Cattle have been spooked the last few nights. Might be coyotes, might be something else. Eliza wiped her mouth with a napkin. You want help? Caleb stared at her. No. I can ride. I'm sure you can, but I don't need help. She shrugged. Suit yourself. He grabbed his coat and hat and walked out, letting the door bang shut behind him. Hank leaned back in his chair, watching Eliza. He's not much for conversation. I noticed. Don't take it personal. He's been alone a long time. Eliza started clearing the plates. I'm not here for conversation. Hank chuckled. No, I suppose you're not. The first week passed in a strange, uncomfortable rhythm. Caleb worked from dawn until well past dark, keeping his distance. Eliza took over the house, cleaning, cooking, organizing the kitchen in a way that made Hank mutter appreciatively. She didn't ask questions. She didn't complain. She just moved through the space like she'd always been there. But tension hung in the air, thick and unspoken. One evening, Caleb came in late to find the kitchen spotless, the fire banked, and a plate of food left warming by the stove. Eliza was sitting at the table, mending a shirt by lamplight. "You didn't have to wait up," Caleb said. "I wasn't waiting. I was working." He sat down, pulled the plate toward him, and started eating. Eliza didn't look up from her sewing. After a few minutes, Caleb spoke. "Hank says you fixed the water pump. It was leaking, wasting water. You know how to do that?" "I know how to figure things out." Caleb chewed slowly, watching her. "You're not what I expected." Eliza tied off a stitch, bit the thread, and finally looked at him. "What did you expect?" "Someone quieter, softer." "Sorry to disappoint." "I didn't say I was disappointed." She set the shirt aside. "Then what are you saying?" Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I'm saying I don't know what to do with you." Eliza's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Something sharp. "You don't have to do anything with me. I'm not a problem you need to solve. I'm just here. That's not—" He stopped, frustration building. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "Having someone around." "Then pretend I'm not here." "Hard to do when you're fixing things and reorganizing the kitchen and what? Making myself useful?" Her voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it now. "Would you prefer I sit in my room and do nothing?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "No." "Then what's the problem?" "There's no problem." "Could have fooled me." They stared at each other across the table, the silence stretching taut. Finally, Caleb pushed his chair back and stood. "I'm going to bed." "Good night, Caleb." He stopped at the base of the stairs, hand on the rail. "Eliza." "Yeah?" "Thank you. For the food." She nodded once. "You're welcome." He climbed the stairs and Eliza went back to her sewing, the lamplight casting long shadows across the walls. The trouble started in the second week. Caleb was out checking the northern fence line when he heard the gunfire, 3 sharp cracks echoing across the valley. He spurred his horse hard, racing toward the sound, and found 2 of his men pinned down behind a water trough, rifles out, trading shots with 4 riders circling the cattle pens. "Caleb," one of the men shouted. "They're trying to run off the herd." Caleb pulled his rifle from the saddle scabbard, levered around, and fired. One of the riders jerked and peeled off, clutching his shoulder. The others scattered, circling wide. "Hold the line!" Caleb barked. But the riders were fast, organized. They weren't random thieves. They knew what they were doing. One of them cut a section of fence and started driving a dozen head of cattle toward the gap. Caleb fired again, missed, cursed. Then from the direction of the house, another shot rang out, louder, sharper. One of the riders went down hard, his horse rearing. The others froze, scanning for the shooter. Caleb turned and saw Eliza standing on the porch, a rifle braced against her shoulder, eyes locked on the riders. She worked the lever, chambered another round, and fired again. The shot kicked up dirt 2 feet in front of the lead rider's horse. The animal spooked, throwing its rider. The remaining 2 riders took one look at the chaos and bolted, disappearing into the hills. Caleb rode up to the house, dismounting before his horse even stopped. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Eliza lowered the rifle, eyes hard. "Helping. You could have gotten yourself killed." "I didn't." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" She stepped down from the porch, still holding the rifle. "You're getting hit, you're outnumbered, and I had a clear shot, so I took it." Caleb's hand shook. Adrenaline, anger, something else he couldn't name. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know enough." She met his eyes, unflinching. "And I'm not going to stand by and watch while your ranch gets torn apart." Hank jogged up, breathing hard. "Everyone all right?" "Yeah," Caleb said tightly. "Thanks to her." Hank looked at Eliza, then at the rifle in her hands, then back at Caleb. "Well, she's got decent aim." Eliza handed the rifle to Hank. "Check the one I dropped. See if he's alive." Hank took the rifle and headed toward the fallen rider. Caleb stared at Eliza, his chest still heaving. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "Kansas. My father taught me before he died." "You never mentioned that." "You never asked." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. "Those men'll come back. And next time they'll bring more." Then we'd better be ready. He looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw something other than a stranger standing in his house. He saw someone who wasn't going to run, someone who'd hold the line. Yeah, he said quietly. We'd better. What? That night they sat at the table again, but the silence was different, less hostile, more aware. Who were they? Eliza asked. Garrett's men, most likely, or someone he hired. The man from the land office? Caleb nodded. He wants this place. He's been circling for months. Now that I'm married, the law won't work. So he's trying force. And the law won't help? The law's 3 days' ride away. By the time they get here, we'd be dead or cleaned out. Eliza folded her hands on the table. So what do we do? Caleb leaned back, exhaustion settling into his bones. We fight, or we leave. You're not leaving. No. Then we fight. He looked at her across the table, this woman he barely knew, this stranger who'd signed a paper and walked into his life, and now sat there talking about fighting like it was the most natural thing in the world. You don't have to do this, Caleb said. You could go. I wouldn't blame you. Eliza's eyes hardened. I told you, I don't run. This isn't your fight. It is now. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. Then we plan. And for the first time since they'd met, something like trust flickered between them. Fragile, uncertain, but there. The planning started that same night, spread across the kitchen table under the flicker of 2 oil lamps. Caleb had pulled out a hand-drawn map of the ranch, rough lines marking fence boundaries, water sources, high ground, and the main routes in and out. Eliza leaned over it, tracing the perimeter with her finger. They came from the west, she said, through the gap near the old creek bed. Yeah, that fence has been weak for months. I kept meaning to reinforce it. Then that's where they'll hit again. Caleb nodded slowly. Probably. But if we put all our men there, they could circle around and hit us from the east. We don't have enough bodies to cover everything. Eliza straightened, arms crossed, thinking. So we don't spread out. We force them to come where we want them. How? Make the west side look weak. Leave it open just enough that it's tempting. Then set a trap. Caleb looked at her, something shifting in his expression. You've done this before. Not exactly, but I've seen enough fights to know how they start. She met his eyes. People go for the easy target. Give them one, and they'll take it every time. Hank had been standing in the doorway, listening. Now he stepped forward. She's right. If we funnel them in, we can box them. Hit them from 2 sides before they know what's happening. Caleb rubbed his jaw, considering. We'd need at least 2 good shooters on high ground, and someone to hold the center in case they break through. I'll take high ground, Eliza said. Both men looked at her. You sure about that? Hank asked. I'm the best shot you have. You know it. Caleb wanted to argue. He didn't like the idea of her out there, exposed in the line of fire. But he couldn't deny the truth of it. She'd dropped a man from 100 yards in the chaos of a raid, cool as stone. Most men he knew couldn't do that. All right, he said finally. You take the north ridge. Hank, you're on the south. I'll hold the center with Ben and Cole. What about the cattle? Hank asked. Move them east tonight. If they want to steal something, let them steal dirt. Hank grinned. I like it. They worked through the details until past midnight. Positioning, timing, signals. Eliza asked questions, sharp and precise, filling in gaps Caleb hadn't even seen. By the time they finished, the plan was tight. Whether it would work was another question entirely. When Hank finally left to catch a few hours of sleep, Caleb stayed at the table, staring at the map. Eliza started clearing the mugs and plates, moving quietly around the kitchen. You should get some rest too, she said. I will. But he didn't move. Eliza set the last plate down and turned to face him. You're worried. Of course I'm worried. If this goes wrong, people die. And if you do nothing, people still die, just slower. Eliza pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. You've been carrying this place alone for a long time. I don't have a choice. You do now. Caleb looked up at her, and the weight in his chest shifted just slightly. I don't know if I can trust that. Then don't. Not yet. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. But tomorrow, when it starts, you won't be alone, and that counts for something. He held her gaze, and for the first time since his father died, Caleb felt the faintest crack in the wall he'd built around himself. He didn't know what to do with it, so he just nodded. Yeah, it does. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Caleb and the men reinforced the eastern fence, moved the cattle, and stockpiled ammunition. Eliza spent her time scouting the ridge, memorizing sight lines and testing distances. She didn't talk much, just worked with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. On the second evening, Caleb found her sitting on the north ridge, looking out over the valley as the sun bled red across the horizon. He climbed up and sat down beside her, not saying anything at first. "You come up here to think?" she asked. "Sometimes. Used to, anyway. It's quiet. That's why I liked it." They sat in silence for a while, watching the light fade. Finally, Eliza spoke. "Why'd you really pick me?" Caleb glanced at her. "What do you mean? Out of all the names in that registry, you didn't ask questions, didn't want to meet me first. You just picked me and walked away. Why?" Caleb looked back out at the valley. "Because you signed your own name." Eliza frowned. "What?" The clerk said most of the women had someone else sign for them. Family, a pastor, someone. But you signed yourself. That told me you weren't waiting for someone to save you. You were handling your own business. She was quiet for a long moment. "That's it? That's it," Eliza laughed, short and dry. "You're a strange man, Caleb Vance." "I've been told." She shook her head, but there was something softer in her expression now. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you picked me." Caleb looked at her, surprised. "Yeah?" "Yeah. I've been in worse situations with worse people. At least here I know where I stand." "And where's that?" "Next to someone who doesn't lie to me." She stood, brushing dust off her skirt. "That's more than most people get." Caleb watched her walk back down the ridge, something tight and unfamiliar settling in his chest. The attack came on the third night, just after midnight. Caleb was on watch near the center of the property when he heard the first sound, hoofbeats, distant but growing louder. He signaled to Ben and Cole, and they moved into position behind the water trough and a stack of lumber. Up on the ridge, Eliza and Hank were invisible in the darkness, rifles ready. The riders came fast, 6 of them this time, spread out in a loose line. They slowed as they approached the western gap, checking the fence, looking for guards. When they didn't see any, they moved forward. Caleb waited, heart hammering, sweat slicking his palms despite the cool night air. He could see them now, dark shapes against the starlight, moving cautiously but not cautiously enough. One of them dismounted, pulling wire cutters from his saddlebag. He knelt by the fence and started cutting. Caleb raised his hand, then dropped it. The first shot came from the north ridge, Eliza's rifle cracking sharp and clean. The man with the cutters went down, clutching his leg. The others scattered, shouting, pulling their own weapons. Hank fired from the south, and another rider jerked sideways, dropping from his saddle. The remaining 4 tried to retreat, but Caleb and his men opened up from the center, cutting off their escape. Bullets tore through the night, horses screamed, men cursed and fired blind. One of the riders broke west, spurring hard. Eliza tracked him, led him just slightly, and fired. The man tumbled from his horse and didn't get up. The fight lasted maybe 2 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 3 men were down, 2 had fled, and 1 was pinned behind his dead horse, hands raised. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot! I'm done!" Caleb walked forward, rifle leveled. "Get up! Slow!" The man stood shakily, hands high. He was young, maybe 25, with a thin face and wild eyes. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead. "Who sent you?" Caleb demanded. "I don't—" Caleb fired into the ground 6 inches from the man's boot. "I'll ask once more. Who sent you?" "Garrett. Garrett sent us. Why?" He wants the land. Said you'd fold if we hit you hard enough." "And if I didn't fold," the man's voice cracked, "then we were supposed to burn you out." Caleb's blood went cold. "When?" "I don't know. He didn't say." Hank came down from the ridge, rifle slung over his shoulder. "You believe him?" "Doesn't matter if I believe him. He's telling the truth." Caleb looked at the young man. "You're going to carry a message back to Garrett. You tell him if he or any of his men set foot on my land again, I won't take prisoners. Understand?" The man nodded frantically. "Yes. Yes, I understand. Then get the hell out of here. The man scrambled onto one of the loose horses and rode off into the darkness, not looking back. Eliza climbed down from the ridge, her face pale but steady. You just let him go. I want Garrett to know we're not backing down. And if it makes him come harder, then we'll be ready. She looked at the bodies on the ground, then back at Caleb. This isn't over. No, it's not. They buried the dead men at dawn, far from the house, with no markers. It felt wrong, but Caleb didn't have the energy to care. These men had come to steal and kill. They'd earned what they got. After the crew gathered in the barn, everyone was exhausted, nerves frayed, but there was something else too, a grim satisfaction. They'd won. Not cleanly, not easily, but they'd won. We got lucky, Hank said, rolling a cigarette. Next time they'll be smarter. Then we'll be smarter too, Caleb replied. Ben, a wiry man in his 40s with a scar running down his cheek, spoke up. We can't keep doing this, Caleb. We're 4 men and a woman against who knows how many Garretts got on his payroll. 5, Eliza said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. You're 4 men and me, she continued. Not and a woman. I held my position. I hit my targets. I didn't freeze. So from now on, count me in the number or don't count me at all. Ben opened his mouth, then closed it. Hank grinned. Cole, the youngest of the crew, just nodded. Caleb looked at her, something fierce and raw rising in his chest. 5 then. Eliza met his eyes and nodded once. Over the next week, the ranch settled into a tense new rhythm. Caleb doubled the watch rotations, reinforced weak points in the fence, and started drilling the men and Eliza on coordinated defense. She took to it faster than anyone expected, moving through drills with a precision that spoke of someone who'd learned hard lessons and remembered them. But it wasn't just the work that changed. Something between Caleb and Eliza had shifted. They still didn't talk much, still kept their distance, but the distance was smaller now, less guarded. One afternoon, Caleb found her in the barn, repairing a saddle. He watched her for a moment, the way her hands moved, quick and sure, no wasted motion. You're good at that, he said. She didn't look up. I've done it before. Where'd you learn? Kansas. My father ran a stable before he lost it. Lost it how? Eliza's hands stilled for just a second, then resumed. Debt. He borrowed money to expand, and the man who lent it called the note early, took everything. My father drank himself to death a year later. Caleb leaned against the stall door. I'm sorry. Don't be. He made his choices. She tied off the thread and set the saddle aside. But I learned something from it. Never owe anyone anything, and never trust a man who smiles when he's taking from you. Sounds like Garrett. Sounds like a lot of men. Caleb crossed his arms, studying her. You don't trust easy. No, do you? No. She smiled faintly. Then we're well matched. He didn't have an answer for that, so he just nodded and walked away. But as he did, he felt that crack in his chest widen just a little more. 2 nights later, Caleb woke to the smell of smoke. He bolted upright, heart pounding, and ran to the window. Orange light flickered in the distance, near the barn. Fire! He grabbed his boots and gun, shouting as he ran down the stairs. Eliza was already up, pulling on her coat, eyes sharp. Where? She demanded. Barn! They sprinted outside. Flames were climbing the western wall of the barn, eating through the dry wood with terrifying speed. The horses inside were screaming, panicked, kicking at their stalls. Get the horses out, Caleb shouted. Eliza ran inside without hesitation, disappearing into the smoke. Caleb grabbed a bucket, filled it from the trough, and threw it at the flames. It did nothing. Hank and the others came running, forming a line, passing buckets, but it wasn't enough. Inside, Eliza fought through the smoke, eyes burning, lungs screaming. She reached the first stall, threw the latch, and dragged the terrified horse out by its halter. It fought her, rearing, but she held on and shoved it toward the door. 1 down, 3 more to go. The second horse came easier. The third fought her so hard she nearly lost her grip, but she wrestled it free and sent it stumbling into the night. The fourth stall was fully engulfed. She could see the horse inside, wild-eyed, trapped. The beam above was cracking, ready to fall. Eliza, get out! Caleb's voice, raw and desperate. She ignored him, grabbed a wet blanket someone had thrown inside, wrapped it around herself, and kicked the stall door. It splintered. She lunged in, grabbed the horse's mane, and yanked. The animal surged forward just as the beam crashed down behind them, sending sparks and embers everywhere. Eliza stumbled out of the barn, coughing violently, the horse wild beside her. Caleb caught her as she fell, pulling her away from the flames. "You insane?" he shouted, but his hands were shaking as he held her. "Horse," she gasped, still coughing. "Had to. Damn the horse! You could have died." She looked up at him, eyes red and streaming, and something raw passed between them. Anger and fear, and something else neither of them could name. The barn burned through the night. By dawn, only the stone foundation remained, blackened and smoking. The horses were safe. No one was hurt. But the loss was brutal. They stood together in the ash and ruin, exhausted, faces streaked with soot. "Garrett," Hank said quietly. Caleb nodded. "Yeah. What now?" Caleb looked at the wreckage, then at his crew, then at Eliza, still standing, still defiant, even covered in ash and smoke. "Now we stop playing defense," he said. "It's time to take the fight to him." The next morning, Caleb rode into town alone. He didn't tell anyone where he was going or why. He just saddled his horse and left before sunrise. He found Garrett in his office above the land registry, sitting behind a polished desk with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. The man looked up when Caleb walked in, not bothering to stand. "Vance, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Caleb closed the door behind him. "You burned my barn." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a fact." "Do you have proof?" "I don't need proof. I know it was you." Garrett leaned back in his chair, smiling thinly. "Even if it were true, which I'm not saying it is, what are you going to do about it? Run to the law. They're 3 days away, and by the time they get here, I'll have a dozen witnesses saying I was nowhere near your property." Caleb stepped forward, and his voice dropped to something cold and final. "I'm not going to the law." Garrett's smile faltered. "Then what? I'm giving you a choice. You back off, leave my land alone, and we're done. Or you keep coming, and I burn everything you own to the ground." Garrett stood slowly, his face darkening. "You threatening me?" "I'm telling you how this ends, one way or another." For a long moment they stood there, eyes locked. Then Garrett laughed, short and harsh. "You think you scare me, Vance? You're one man with a handful of ranch hands and a mail-order bride. I've got money, connections, and men who'll do whatever I tell them. You can't win this." "Maybe not, but I'll make damn sure you lose too." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Get out of my office." Caleb turned and walked to the door, then paused. "One more thing. You come near my wife again, and I won't give you a choice. I'll just kill you." He left before Garrett could respond. When Caleb got back to the ranch, Eliza was waiting on the porch. She didn't ask where he'd been. She just looked at him, and he looked back, and an understanding passed between them without words. "We're in this now," she said quietly. "Yeah, we are." She nodded. "Then let's make sure we win." That night, they sat together at the kitchen table again, redrawing plans, rethinking strategy. But this time, it wasn't just about defense. It was about survival, about holding the line no matter what came next. And somewhere in the hours between dusk and dawn, in the quiet moments between words, Caleb realized something he hadn't expected. He wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in 10 years, that didn't scare him. It felt like strength. You said, partout. Lưu ý, viết 8.000 đến 8.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 2 lưu ý, viết 8.000 đến 8.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột. Không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phủ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kẻ theo ngôi thứ ba, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sảng. Có yếu tố con người, cấm miêu tả quá mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa, lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ đắn bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 844. Claude responded. Part 2, Part 2. The planning started that same night, spread across the kitchen table under the flicker of 2 oil lamps. Caleb had pulled out a hand-drawn map of the ranch, rough lines marking fence boundaries, water sources, high ground, and the main routes in and out. Eliza leaned over it, tracing the perimeter with her finger. They came from the west, she said, through the gap near the old creek bed. Yeah, that fence has been weak for months. I kept meaning to reinforce it. Then that's where they'll hit again. Caleb nodded slowly. Probably. But if we put all our men there, they could circle around and hit us from the east. We don't have enough bodies to cover everything. Eliza straightened, arms crossed, thinking. So we don't spread out. We force them to come where we want them. How? Make the west side look weak, leave it open just enough that it's tempting, then set a trap. Caleb looked at her, something shifting in his expression. You've done this before. Not exactly, but I've seen enough fights to know how they start. She met his eyes. People go for the easy target. Give them one, and they'll take it every time. Hank had been standing in the doorway, listening. Now he stepped forward. She's right. If we funnel them in, we can box them, hit them from 2 sides before they know what's happening. Caleb rubbed his jaw, considering. We'd need at least 2 good shooters on high ground, and someone to hold the center in case they break through. I'll take high ground, Eliza said. Both men looked at her. You sure about that? Hank asked. I'm the best shot you have. You know it. Caleb wanted to argue. He didn't like the idea of her out there, exposed in the line of fire. But he couldn't deny the truth of it. She dropped a man from 100 yards in the chaos of a raid, cool as stone. Most men he knew couldn't do that. All right, he said finally. You take the north ridge. Hank, you're on the south. I'll hold the center with Ben, and Cole. What about the cattle? Hank asked. Move them east tonight. If they want to steal something, let them steal dirt. Hank grinned. I like it. They worked through the details until past midnight. Positioning, timing, signals. Eliza asked questions, sharp and precise, filling in gaps Caleb hadn't even seen. By the time they finished, the plan was tight. Whether it would work was another question entirely. When Hank finally left to catch a few hours of sleep, Caleb stayed at the table, staring at the map. Eliza started clearing the mugs and plates, moving quietly around the kitchen. You should get some rest too, she said. I will. But he didn't move. Eliza set the last plate down and turned to face him. You're worried. Of course I'm worried. If this goes wrong, people die. And if you do nothing, people still die. Just slower. Eliza pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. You've been carrying this place alone for a long time. I don't have a choice. You do now. Caleb looked up at her, and the weight in his chest shifted just slightly. I don't know if I can trust that. Then don't. Not yet. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. But tomorrow, when it starts, you won't be alone, and that counts for something. He held her gaze, and for the first time since his father died, Caleb felt the faintest crack in the wall he'd built around himself. He didn't know what to do with it, so he just nodded. Yeah, it does. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Caleb and the men reinforced the eastern fence, moved the cattle, and stockpiled ammunition. Eliza spent her time scouting the ridge, memorizing sight lines, and testing distances. She didn't talk much, just worked with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. On the second evening, Caleb found her sitting on the north ridge, looking out over the valley as the sun bled red across the horizon. He climbed up and sat down beside her, not saying anything at first. You come up here to think? She asked. Sometimes. Used to, anyway. It's quiet. That's why I liked it. They sat in silence for a while, watching the light fade. Finally, Eliza spoke. Why'd you really pick me? Caleb glanced at her. What do you mean? Out of all the names in that registry, you didn't ask questions, didn't want to meet me first. You just picked me and walked away. Why? Caleb looked back out at the valley. Because you signed your own name. Eliza frowned. What? The clerk said most of the women had someone else sign for them. Family, a pastor, someone. But you signed yourself. That told me you weren't waiting for someone to save you. You were handling your own business. She was quiet for a long moment. That's it? That's it. Eliza laughed, short and dry. You're a strange man, Caleb Vance. I've been told. She shook her head, but there was something softer in her expression now. For what it's worth, I'm glad you picked me. Caleb looked at her, surprised. Yeah? Yeah. I've been in worse situations with worse people. At least here, I know where I stand. And where's that? Next to someone who doesn't lie to me. She stood, brushing dust off her skirt. That's more than most people get. Caleb watched her walk back down the ridge, something tight and unfamiliar settling in his chest. The attack came on the third night, just after midnight. Caleb was on watch near the center of the property when he heard the first sound. Hoofbeats, distant but growing louder. He signaled to Ben and Cole, and they moved into position behind the water trough and a stack of lumber. Up on the ridge, Eliza and Hank were invisible in the darkness, rifles ready. The riders came fast, 6 of them this time, spread out in a loose line. They slowed as they approached the western gap, checking the fence, looking for guards. When they didn't see any, they moved forward. Caleb waited, heart hammering, sweat slicking his palms despite the cool night air. He could see them now, dark shapes against the starlight, moving cautiously but not cautiously enough. One of them dismounted, pulling wire cutters from his saddlebag. He knelt by the fence and started cutting. Caleb raised his hand, then dropped it. The first shot came from the north ridge, Eliza's rifle cracking sharp and clean. The man with the cutters went down, clutching his leg. The others scattered, shouting, pulling their own weapons. Hank fired from the south, and another rider jerked sideways, dropping from his saddle. The remaining 4 tried to retreat, but Caleb and his men opened up from the center, cutting off their escape. Bullets tore through the night, horses screamed, men cursed and fired blind. One of the riders broke west, spurring hard. Eliza tracked him, led him just slightly, and fired. The man tumbled from his horse and didn't get up. The fight lasted maybe 2 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 3 men were down, 2 had fled, and 1 was pinned behind his dead horse, hands raised. Don't shoot! Don't shoot, I'm done! Caleb walked forward, rifle leveled. Get up, slow! The man stood shakily, hands high. He was young, maybe 25, with a thin face and wild eyes. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead. Who sent you? Caleb demanded. I don't... Caleb fired into the ground 6 inches from the man's boot. I'll ask once more. Who sent you? Garrett. Garrett sent us. Why? He wants the land. Said you'd fold if we hit you hard enough. And if I didn't fold? The man's voice cracked. Then we were supposed to burn you out. Caleb's blood went cold. When? I don't know. He didn't say. Hank came down from the ridge, rifle slung over his shoulder. You believe him? Doesn't matter if I believe him. He's telling the truth. Caleb looked at the young man. You're going to carry a message back to Garrett? You tell him if he or any of his men set foot on my land again, I won't take prisoners. Understand? The man nodded frantically. Yes. Yes, I understand. Then get the hell out of here. The man scrambled onto one of the loose horses and rode off into the darkness, not looking back. Eliza climbed down from the ridge, her face pale but steady. You just let him go. I want Garrett to know we're not backing down. And if it makes him come harder, then we'll be ready. She looked at the bodies on the ground, then back at Caleb. This isn't over. No, it's not. They buried the dead men at dawn, far from the house, with no markers. It felt wrong, but Caleb didn't have the energy to care. These men had come to steal and kill. They'd earned what they got. After, the crew gathered in the barn. Everyone was exhausted, nerves frayed, but there was something else too. A grim satisfaction. They'd won. Not cleanly, not easily, but they'd won. We got lucky, Hank said, rolling a cigarette. Next time, they'll be smarter. Then we'll be smarter too, Caleb replied. Ben, a wiry man in his 40s with a scar running down his cheek, spoke up. We can't keep doing this, Caleb. We're 4 men and a woman against who knows how many Garrett's got on his payroll. 5, Eliza said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. You're 4 men and me, she continued. Not and a woman. I held my position. I hit my targets. I didn't freeze. So from now on, count me in the number or don't count me at all. Ben opened his mouth, then closed it. Hank grinned. Cole, the youngest of the crew, just nodded. Caleb looked at her, something fierce and raw rising in his chest. 5, then. Eliza met his eyes and nodded once. Over the next week, the ranch settled into a tense new rhythm. Caleb doubled the watch rotations, reinforced weak points in the fence, and started drilling the men, and Eliza, on coordinated defense. She took to it faster than anyone expected, moving through drills with a precision that spoke of someone who'd learned hard lessons and remembered them. But it wasn't just the work that changed. Something between Caleb and Eliza had shifted. They still didn't talk much, still kept their distance. But the distance was smaller now, less guarded. One afternoon, Caleb found her in the barn repairing a saddle. He watched her for a moment, the way her hands moved, quick and sure, no wasted motion. You're good at that, he said. She didn't look up. I've done it before. Where'd you learn? Kansas. My father ran a stable before he lost it. Lost it how? Eliza's hands stilled for just a second, then resumed. Debt. He borrowed money to expand, and the man who lent it called the note early. Took everything. My father drank himself to death a year later. Caleb leaned against the stall door. I'm sorry. Don't be. He made his choices. She tied off the thread and set the saddle aside. But I learned something from it. Never owe anyone anything, and never trust a man who smiles when he's taking from you. Sounds like Garrett. Sounds like a lot of men. Caleb crossed his arms, studying her. You don't trust easy. No, do you? No. She smiled faintly. Then we're well matched. He didn't have an answer for that, so he just nodded and walked away. But as he did, he felt that crack in his chest widen just a little more. 2 nights later, Caleb woke to the smell of smoke. He bolted upright, heart pounding, and ran to the window. Orange light flickered in the distance, near the barn. Fire! He grabbed his boots and gun, shouting as he ran down the stairs. Eliza was already up, pulling on her coat, eyes sharp. Where? She demanded. Barn! They sprinted outside. Flames were climbing the western wall of the barn, eating through the dry wood with terrifying speed. The horses inside were screaming, panicked, kicking at their stalls. Get the horses out, Caleb shouted. Eliza ran inside without hesitation, disappearing into the smoke. Caleb grabbed a bucket, filled it from the trough, and threw it at the flames. It did nothing. Hank and the others came running, forming a line, passing buckets, but it wasn't enough. Inside, Eliza fought through the smoke, eyes burning, lungs screaming. She reached the first stall, threw the latch, and dragged the terrified horse out by its halter. It fought her, rearing, but she held on and shoved it toward the door. 1 down, 3 more to go. The second horse came easier. The third fought her so hard she nearly lost her grip, but she wrestled it free and sent it stumbling into the night. The fourth stall was fully engulfed. She could see the horse inside, wild-eyed, trapped. The beam above was cracking, ready to fall. Eliza, get out! Caleb's voice, raw and desperate. She ignored him, grabbed a wet blanket someone had thrown inside, wrapped it around herself, and kicked the stall door. It splintered. She lunged in, grabbed the horse's mane, and yanked. The animal surged forward just as the beam crashed down behind them, sending sparks and embers everywhere. Eliza stumbled out of the barn, coughing violently, the horse wild beside her. Caleb caught her as she fell, pulling her away from the flames. You insane? He shouted, but his hands were shaking as he held her. Horse! She gasped, still coughing. Had to. Damn the horse! You could have died! She looked up at him, eyes red and streaming, and something raw passed between them, anger and fear, and something else neither of them could name. The barn burned through the night. By dawn, only the stone foundation remained, blackened and smoking. The horses were safe. No one was hurt. But the loss was brutal. They stood together in the ash and ruin, exhausted, faces streaked with soot. Garrett, Hank said quietly. Caleb nodded. Yeah. What now? Caleb looked at the wreckage, then at his crew, then at Eliza, still standing, still defiant, even covered in ash and smoke. Now we stop playing defense, he said. It's time to take the fight to him. The next morning, Caleb rode into town alone. He didn't tell anyone where he was going or why. He just saddled his horse and left before sunrise. He found Garrett in his office above the land registry, sitting behind a polished desk with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. The man looked up when Caleb walked in, not bothering to stand. Vance, to what do I owe the pleasure? Caleb closed the door behind him. You burned my barn. Garrett raised an eyebrow. That's a serious accusation. It's a fact. Do you have proof? I don't need proof. I know it was you. Garrett leaned back in his chair, smiling thinly. Even if it were true, which I'm not saying it is, what are you going to do about it? Run to the law? They're 3 days away, and by the time they get here, I'll have a dozen witnesses saying I was nowhere near your property. Caleb stepped forward, and his voice dropped to something cold and final. I'm not going to the law. Garrett's smile faltered. Then what? I'm giving you a choice. You back off, leave my land alone, and we're done. Or you keep coming, and I burn everything you own to the ground. Garrett stood slowly, his face darkening. You threatening me? I'm telling you how this ends, one way or another. For a long moment, they stood there, eyes locked. Then Garrett laughed, short and harsh. You think you scare me, Vance? You're one man with a handful of ranch hands and a mail-order bride. I've got money, connections, and men who'll do whatever I tell them. You can't win this. Maybe not, but I'll make damn sure you lose too. Garrett's jaw tightened. Get out of my office. Caleb turned and walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. You come near my wife again, and I won't give you a choice. I'll just kill you. He left before Garrett could respond. When Caleb got back to the ranch, Eliza was waiting on the porch. She didn't ask where he'd been, she just looked at him, and he looked back, and an understanding passed between them without words. We're in this now, she said quietly. Yeah, we are. She nodded. Then let's make sure we win. But winning wasn't simple, and they both knew it. That afternoon, Caleb called everyone together in what was left of the barn, just charred posts and a few sections of wall still standing. The smell of burned wood hung heavy in the air. We can't keep waiting for Garrett to make the next move, Caleb said. He's got resources we don't have. Money, men, time. If we just sit here and defend, eventually he'll wear us down. So what's the play? Ben asked. We hit his supply lines. He's moving cattle through the valley every 2 weeks. Big herds, heading east to the railhead. That's his cash flow. Hank whistled low. You talking about rustling his stock? I'm talking about making it expensive for him to keep this up. He wants to bleed me dry. I'll do the same to him. That's risky, Cole said. If we get caught... We won't get caught, Eliza cut in. All eyes turned to her, because we're not going to be stupid about it. We don't take the whole herd. We take enough to hurt him, enough to make him think twice, and we do it clean. Caleb looked at her, surprised. You've thought about this. I've thought about a lot of things. She crossed her arms. Garrett thinks we're cornered. Let's show him we're not. Ben scratched his jaw, considering. When's the next herd moving through? 4 days, Caleb said. They'll pass through the canyon just south of here. Narrow passage, easy to block. And his men? Usually 6 or 7 drovers, but they're hired hands, not gunfighters. They're not looking for a fight. Hank nodded slowly. Could work, if we move fast. Then we move fast, Caleb said. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Eliza worked alongside the men, learning the canyon terrain, identifying choke points, planning escape routes. She asked questions constantly, pushing for details, refusing to leave anything to chance. Caleb found himself relying on her input more and more, not because he had to, but because she was good at this, better than he wanted to admit. On the 3rd night, he found her sitting outside, sharpening a knife by lamplight. He sat down beside her, and for a while they didn't speak. You nervous? He finally asked. Little bit. You don't have to come. She looked at him, blade glinting in the low light. Yes, I do. Why? Because if I don't, you'll get yourself killed trying to protect me. She went back to sharpening. I'm not interested in being a widow twice in one lifetime. You were married before? Eliza's hands paused. Briefly. He died 6 months after the wedding. Fever. I'm sorry. Don't be. I barely knew him. She tested the blade with her thumb. It was arranged, just like ours, except he was kind, decent. I think we might have been happy, given time. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just sat with her in the quiet. This isn't the same, Eliza said after a while. What we've got, it's not about being happy. No, it's about surviving. Yeah, she looked at him then, really looked at him. But maybe that's enough. Caleb held her gaze, and something shifted between them, something neither of them had words for yet. He nodded. Maybe it is. The night of the raid, they moved out just after sunset. 6 of them total: Caleb, Eliza, Hank, Ben, Cole, and a ranch hand named Davis who'd worked cattle drives before and knew how to move stock quietly. They rode hard for the canyon, arriving just as the last light faded from the sky. The canyon was narrow, steep-walled, with a dry riverbed running through the center. Perfect for an ambush. Caleb positioned his people carefully, Eliza and Ben on the high ground with rifles, Hank and Davis at the choke point to turn the herd, Caleb and Cole ready to cut out the cattle they wanted. They waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Caleb's nerves stretched tight, every sound amplified in the darkness. Beside him, Cole shifted his weight, fidgeting. Easy, Caleb murmured. I've never done anything like this before. Just stay close and do what I tell you. Then they heard it. The low rumble of hooves, the creak of saddle leather, the occasional shout of a drover keeping the herd moving. Caleb signaled to the others. Everyone went still. The cattle came first, a river of brown and white moving through the darkness. Behind them, the drovers, 7 men, just like Caleb expected, riding loose and relaxed. They weren't expecting trouble. Caleb waited until his herd was halfway through the canyon. Then he whistled, sharp and short. Hank and Davis stepped out and fired their rifles into the air. The cattle spooked immediately, bellowing and scattering. The drovers shouted, trying to regain control, but it was chaos. Caleb and Cole rode in fast, cutting out a dozen head and driving them toward the side canyon they'd scouted earlier. The drovers saw them, started to give chase, but Eliza's rifle cracked from above, and a bullet kicked up dirt right in front of the lead rider's horse. The animal reared, throwing its rider. "That's a warning!" Eliza's voice rang out clear and hard. "Next one won't be." The drovers pulled up, hands raised. They weren't fighters. They were just working men trying to make a wage. They knew when to fold. Caleb and his crew drove the cattle out of the canyon and into the hills, moving fast, not looking back. By the time they reached the ranch, it was well past midnight. They penned the stolen cattle in a hastily built corral and stood there, breathing hard, adrenaline still pumping. "We did it," Cole said, almost disbelieving. "We did," Hank agreed, grinning. Caleb looked at Eliza. Her face was flushed, eyes bright, and for the first time since he'd met her, she was smiling, really smiling. "Not bad for a mail-order bride," she said. He laughed, surprised by the sound. Not bad at all. But the victory was short-lived. 2 days later, a rider came to the ranch, a boy, no more than 16, riding a lathered horse. He dismounted shakily and handed Caleb a folded piece of paper. "From Mr. Garrett," the boy said. "He said you'd want to read it right away." Caleb unfolded the paper. The message was short. "You took what's mine. Now I'll take what's yours. Consider this your last warning." Caleb crumpled the note in his fist. "When did he give you this?" "This morning, he said..." The boy swallowed hard. "He said to tell you he's coming, tomorrow night, with enough men to finish this." Eliza stepped up beside Caleb, reading the tension in his face. "How many?" The boy looked at her, then at Caleb. 20, maybe more." The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Hank cursed under his breath. "We can't fight 20 men." "No," Caleb agreed. "We can't." "Then what do we do?" Ben asked. Caleb looked around at his crew, exhausted, outnumbered, but still standing. Then he looked at Eliza. She met his eyes, and he saw no fear there, just resolve. "We make a stand," Caleb said quietly. "One way or another, this ends tomorrow." That night they prepared, not for a fight they could win, but for a fight they had to make. They fortified what was left of the barn, stockpiled ammunition, set traps along the perimeter. Eliza moved through the work with grim efficiency, her mind already running through scenarios, calculating angles, measuring risks. Late that night, when the others had finally collapsed into exhausted sleep, Caleb found her standing alone near the remains of the burned barn, staring out at the dark valley. "You should rest," he said. "Can't." "Me neither." They stood side by side in the darkness, not touching, not speaking. Finally, Eliza broke the silence. "If we don't make it through tomorrow, don't. No, listen." She turned to face him. "If we don't make it, I want you to know this wasn't what I expected, any of it, but I'm glad I stayed." Caleb looked at her, and something in his chest cracked wide open. "Eliza, I'm not finished." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were fierce. "You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever have again. A place, a reason, and I'm not going to let Garrett or anyone else take that away, not without a fight." Caleb reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were rough, calloused from work, but they gripped his with surprising strength. "We're going to make it," he said. "Both of us." "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, then so do I." They stood there together, hands clasped, two stubborn people who'd been forced together by circumstance and necessity, now bound by something deeper. Something neither of them had words for yet. Tomorrow would bring fire and blood and a reckoning long overdue. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, they had this. And it was enough. Dawn came too fast and brought no comfort with it. Caleb stood on the porch watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pale blue, a cup of coffee going cold in his hands. Behind him, the house was quiet except for the occasional creak of floorboards as the others moved through their preparations. Everyone knew what was coming. No one wanted to say it out loud. Eliza came out and stood beside him, her own cup steaming in the cool morning air. She'd braided her hair tight and changed into pants and a work shirt. Practical, ready. She looked like someone preparing for war. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "Hour, maybe." "You?" "About the same." They stood in silence, watching the valley emerge from shadow. Somewhere out there, Garrett and his men were coming. 20 riders, armed and paid, with one purpose. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. "We could still leave," Eliza said quietly. "Take the horses and ride east. Be in the next territory by nightfall." Caleb looked at her. "You believe that?" "No." "Me neither." He set his cup down on the rail. "He'd just follow, or send someone who would. This ends here or it doesn't end at all." Eliza nodded, her jaw set. "Then we'd better make it count." Hank came out a few minutes later, followed by Ben, Cole, and Davis. They all looked tired, wired, scared. But they were here. That had to mean something. "Positions?" Hank asked. Caleb turned to face them. "Same as before. Eliza and Ben on the north ridge. Hank, you're south. Cole and Davis, you're with me in the center. We hold the main approach and funnel them in. Don't waste shots. Make every bullet count." "And if they break through?" Cole asked. His voice shook just slightly. "Then we fall back to the house. Barricade the doors and windows. Fight from there." "That's a death trap," Ben said flatly. "Yeah, it is, but it's the only trap we've got." Caleb looked at each of them in turn. "No one's forcing you to stay. If you want to ride out, do it now. I won't think less of you." No one moved. Hank spat into the dirt. "Hell with that. I've been working this land too long to let some bastard in a suit take it." Ben nodded. "I'm in." Cole swallowed hard, then squared his shoulders. "Me too." Davis just checked his rifle and said nothing, but his presence was answer enough. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. Gratitude, maybe, or just the raw understanding that these people were willing to die beside him. He didn't have words for it, so he just nodded. "All right then, let's get to work." They spent the morning reinforcing positions, checking sight lines, and laying out ammunition. Eliza climbed the north ridge again, studying the approach from every angle. Caleb watched her from below, the way she moved with purpose, no hesitation, no doubt. She'd changed since that first day. Or maybe she'd always been this way, and he just hadn't seen it. Around midday, she came back down and found him near the water trough, refilling canteens. "I've been thinking," she said. "About?" "The terrain. If they come straight at us, We've got the advantage, but Garrett's not stupid. He'll know we're dug in. So? So what if we don't wait for him to come to us? What if we hit him first? Caleb frowned. We're outnumbered 4-1. Ambush only works if you've got surprise and position. We'd lose both if we leave the ranch. Not if we don't go far. Eliza crouched down and drew a rough map in the dirt with her finger. There's a dry wash about half a mile south, deep enough to hide horses, close enough to the main trail that they'll pass right by it. If we put 2 shooters there, we could take out a quarter of his men before they even reach the ranch. And the rest? They'd scatter, regroup, and come at us angry. But they'd also be down 5 or 6 men. That changes the odds. Caleb studied the map she'd drawn, his mind working through the logistics. It was risky. If the ambush failed, they'd be caught in the open. But if it worked, it might give them a real chance. Who'd go? He asked. Me? And one other. Hank, probably. He's steady. Absolutely not. Eliza looked up at him, eyes sharp. Why? Because if something goes wrong, I'm not losing you out there. You're not losing me anywhere. I can handle myself. I know you can. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. Frustration and something else he couldn't name boiling up inside him. You're my wife. Eliza stood slowly, brushing dirt off her hands. And you're my husband. That doesn't mean you get to lock me in the house while you and the others do the fighting. I'm not trying to lock you anywhere. I'm trying to keep you alive. Then trust me to do my part. Her voice was steady, but there was fire underneath. I'm not asking for permission, Caleb. I'm telling you what needs to happen. We need that ambush, and I'm the best person to make it work. They stared at each other, the tension thick between them. Finally, Caleb let out a long breath and looked away. If you do this and it goes wrong, it won't. You don't know that. No, but I'm willing to bet on it. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I need you to trust me, the way I trusted you when you told me to hold that ridge, the way I trusted you when you said we'd make it through this. I need that same faith back. Caleb met her eyes, and the fight drained out of him. She was right. He knew it, hated it, but knew it. All right, he said quietly. You and Hank, but you stay low, you stay smart, and you get back here the second it's done. No heroics. No heroics, she agreed. 2 hours before sunset, Eliza and Hank rode south toward the dry wash. They moved fast, keeping low, using the terrain to stay out of sight. When they reached the wash, they dismounted and led the horses down into the deep cut in the earth. It was perfect, wide enough to hide them, deep enough that no one passing on the trail above would see them unless they were looking straight down. Hank checked his rifle, then glanced at Eliza. You ever shot at a man who wasn't shooting back? No. It's different, harder in some ways. I know. You sure you can do this? Eliza looked at him, her expression unreadable. I don't want to, but I will. Because if I don't, Caleb dies. You die. Everyone back there dies. So yeah, I can do this. Hank nodded slowly. Good enough for me. They settled in to wait, rifles propped on the edge of the wash, eyes on the southern trail. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the valley. Time stretched out, thick and heavy. Then, just as the light began to fail, they heard it. Hoofbeats. Lots of them. Eliza's pulse kicked up, but she kept her breathing steady. Beside her, Hank tensed, finger resting lightly on the trigger. The riders came into view, dark shapes against the fading sky, moving in a loose column. Eliza counted them quickly. 18. Close enough. They rode with the casual confidence of men who thought they had already won. At the front, she recognized Garrett. Even from this distance, she could see the expensive cut of his coat, the polished gleam of his saddle. He rode like a man going to collect a debt, not a man riding into a fight. Eliza sighted down her rifle, picking her target, a rider near the middle of the column. Not Garrett. Not yet. She wanted him to see his men fall first. On 3, Hank whispered. Eliza nodded. 1 sec. She exhaled slowly, steadying her aim. 2. The world narrowed to the small circle of her sights. 3. They fired together. 2 men dropped from their saddles, the crack of gunfire shattering the quiet. The column erupted into chaos, horses rearing, men shouting, scrambling for weapons. Eliza worked the lever on her rifle, chambered another round, and fired again. Another man went down. Hank took out a fourth before the riders scattered, diving for cover, returning fire blindly into the growing darkness. Bullets whined overhead, kicking up dirt along the edge of the wash. "Time to go!" Hank shouted. Eliza fired one more shot, then dropped down into the wash and ran for her horse. Hank was already mounted, wheeling his animal around. Eliza swung into the saddle and spurred hard, racing north toward the ranch. Behind them, the shouting grew louder, more organized. Garrett's men were regrouping. They rode flat out, the horses straining, hooves pounding the hard earth. Eliza risked a glance back and saw riders breaking from cover, giving chase. She leaned low over her horse's neck and pushed harder. The ranch came into view just as full dark settled over the valley. Caleb was waiting at the gate, rifle in hand. When he saw them coming, he threw it open and waved them through. "How many?" he shouted. "4 down," Eliza called back. "Maybe 14 left." "They right behind you?" "Close enough." Caleb slammed the gate shut and barred it. "Positions, now!" Eliza and Hank dismounted and ran for their assigned spots. Eliza climbed the ridge, her lungs burning, legs shaking from adrenaline. She dropped into position beside Ben, who handed her a box of ammunition without a word. "Here they come," Ben said, pointing. The riders were visible now, a dark mass moving fast across the open ground. They spread out as they approached, no longer a column but a skirmish line. Smart, harder to pin down. Caleb stood in the center of the yard, rifle ready, jaw set. "Hold your fire until they're in range. Make them come to us." The riders slowed as they reached the outer fence line, stopping just beyond rifle range. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one man rode forward, Garrett, sitting tall in his saddle, silhouetted against the night sky. "Vance," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "You've made your point. You're tougher than I thought. But this ends now. Surrender the land and walk away, and no one else has to die." Caleb stepped forward, into the light spilling from the house. "You burned my barn. You sent men to kill me and steal my cattle, and now you want me to just hand over everything I've built." "I want you to be smart," Garrett shouted back. "You can't win this. I've got 14 men out here and more I can call. You've got what, 5? 6? It's over, Vance. Take the deal while you still can." Caleb's hands tightened on his rifle. For a second, Eliza thought he might actually consider it. Then he shook his head. "Go to hell, Garrett." Garrett's face darkened, even from this distance. "Then you've chosen how this ends." He wheeled his horse around and rode back to his men. There was a moment of stillness, a breath drawn and held. Then Garrett raised his hand and dropped it. The riders charged. They came fast and hard, firing as they rode, bullets tearing through the night. Caleb and his crew opened up, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness. The first wave hit the fence line and broke against it, horses stumbling over posts, men diving for cover. 2 riders went down in the initial volley. Then 3 more as Eliza and Ben poured fire from above. But there were too many. The attackers spread out, flanking, probing for weaknesses. One group broke east, trying to circle around. Hank caught them with a devastating burst of fire from the south ridge, dropping 2 and scattering the rest. In the center, Caleb, Cole, and Davis held the line, firing steadily, methodically. But the pressure was relentless. The attackers were closing in, using the darkness and chaos to their advantage. "They're going to breach the east side," Ben shouted. Eliza swung her rifle around and saw them. 3 riders pushing hard toward a gap in the defenses. She fired, missed, cursed, and fired again. One of the riders jerked and fell. The other 2 kept coming. "Caleb," she screamed, "east side!" But Caleb was pinned down, trading shots with 2 men behind an overturned wagon. He couldn't get there in time. Eliza made a decision. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and half slid, half ran down the ridge, hitting the ground hard and sprinting toward the gap. She reached it just as the first rider crashed through, his horse wild-eyed and foaming. She pulled her pistol and fired twice. The rider toppled backward out of his saddle. The second rider saw her and raised his gun. Eliza dove behind a water trough just as the shot cracked past her head. She came up firing, and the man slumped forward, his horse veering away. But the move had cost her. She was exposed now, cut off from cover, and more riders were coming. She could see them converging, closing in. Then Caleb was there, appearing out of the smoke and chaos, rifle blazing. He dropped one attacker, then another, moving with a brutal efficiency she'd never seen before. He reached her and grabbed her arm. "What the hell are you doing down here?" "Saving your eastern flank. You're supposed to be on the ridge." "Yeah, well, things change." A bullet whined past them, close enough that they both felt the displacement of air. Caleb shoved her toward the house. "Inside. Now. Not without you. I'm right behind you. Go." They ran together, firing over their shoulders, bullets kicking up dirt at their heels. They crashed through the front door and Caleb slammed it shut, throwing the bolt. Outside, the gunfire was deafening, relentless. Hank stumbled in a moment later, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "They're everywhere. We can't hold the perimeter." "Then we hold the house," Caleb said. He moved to the window and smashed out the glass with the butt of his rifle. "Ben, Cole, fall back to the house." Through the window, Eliza saw Ben running hard across the yard, Cole right behind him. They were halfway to the house when one of Garrett's men stepped out from behind the barn ruins and fired. Cole went down, clutching his shoulder. "Cole!" Ben skidded to a stop, grabbed the younger man, and hauled him upright. Together they staggered toward the house, bullets chasing them every step. Caleb threw the door open and dragged them both inside. Cole was pale, breathing hard, blood soaking through his shirt, but he was alive. "Davis?" Caleb asked. Ben shook his head. "He's gone. Took a bullet to the chest. Didn't even have time to scream." A heavy silence fell over the room. Davis had been quiet, steady, reliable. And now he was just gone. Another body in the dirt. Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach, but she pushed it down. There'd be time to grieve later, if there was a later. "Barricade the windows," Caleb ordered. "Use whatever you can find. We hold here until they give up or we run out of bullets." They worked fast, shoving furniture against the windows, stacking anything heavy near the doors. Outside, the attackers were regrouping, their shouts growing more organized. They'd taken losses, but they still had numbers. And they knew it. Eliza reloaded her rifle, her hand shaking slightly. She'd killed men tonight, more than she could count. The weight of it sat heavy on her, but she couldn't afford to think about it. Not yet. Caleb came up beside her, checking the barricade. "You all right?" "No, but I'm still here." He nodded, then paused, looking at her. "What you did out there, covering the flank, holding them off, that was stupid?" "Brave." She met his eyes, and for a second the chaos outside faded. "I told you. I don't run." "I know." A sudden impact shook the door, someone ramming it with something heavy. The bolt held, but it wouldn't last forever. "They're coming in," Hank said grimly. Caleb raised his rifle. "Then we make them pay for every inch." The door splintered on the third impact, the bolt tearing free. 3 men rushed in, guns blazing. Caleb shot the first one before he cleared the threshold. Hank took the second. Eliza fired at the third and missed, but Ben's shot found its mark. More came behind them. The room erupted into chaos, gunfire, smoke, shouting. Eliza lost track of everything except the next target, the next shot. Her ears rang, her eyes burned, but she kept firing. A man lunged at her from the side. She swung her rifle like a club, catching him across the jaw. He went down, and she shot him before he could rise. Beside her, Caleb fought like a cornered animal, vicious, desperate, refusing to go down. He took a bullet to the arm and didn't even slow, just switched hands and kept shooting. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the attack stopped. The surviving raiders pulled back, dragging their wounded, retreating into the darkness. Caleb and his crew stood in the wreckage of the house, breathing hard, covered in blood and soot and powder burns. The floor was littered with spent casings and broken furniture. 2 bodies lay crumpled near the door. "Everyone still alive?" Caleb rasped. One by one, they answered. Eliza, Hank, Ben, Cole, barely, clutching his wounded shoulder. "How many left out there?" Ben asked. "Hard to say. 8, maybe. Could be less." "They'll come again." "Yeah, they will." Eliza moved to the broken window and looked out. The yard was eerily quiet now, the only sound the low moan of wind through the ruins. She could see shapes moving in the darkness, regrouping, preparing. "Caleb," she said quietly. He came to her side. "What?" "Look." She pointed toward the southern edge of the property, where a dozen torches had just flared to life, their flames dancing in the darkness. They're going to burn us out, Hank said flatly. Caleb's face went hard. Like hell they are. He turned to the others. Eliza, you're with me. Hank, Ben, hold the house. If we're not back in 10 minutes, don't wait for us. Take the horses and ride. Caleb, that's suicide, Ben said. Maybe. But if we let them burn us out, we're dead anyway. He looked at Eliza. You ready? She checked her ammunition. 3 rounds left in her rifle. Handful more in her pistol. Not much, but it would have to do. Ready? She said. They slipped out through the back door and into the night, moving low and fast. The torchbearers were advancing slowly, spreading out in a line, clearly planning to surround the house and light it from all sides. Caleb and Eliza circled wide, using the ruins of the barn for cover. They got within 50 yards before one of the torchbearers spotted them. Contact! North side! Bullets tore through the air. Caleb and Eliza split up, running in opposite directions. Caleb fired as he moved, dropping one torchbearer, then another. Eliza came around from the other side and shot a third. The torches fell, guttering in the dirt, but there were more, always more. Eliza ran out of rifle ammunition and pulled her pistol, firing until the hammer clicked on empty. She was out, completely out. A man rushed her from the darkness. She didn't think, just reacted, smashing the pistol into his face, driving her knee into his gut as he doubled over, then slamming the gun down on the back of his skull. He dropped. She grabbed his rifle and spun around just in time to see Garrett himself, 20 yards away, torch in one hand, pistol in the other, aiming straight at Caleb's back. Caleb! She brought the rifle up and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to make Garrett flinch. He turned toward her instead, raising his pistol. Time slowed. Eliza saw his finger tighten on the trigger. She tried to work the rifle's lever, but it jammed. She was going to die. Then Caleb tackled Garrett from the side, driving him into the ground. The torch flew from Garrett's hand, landing in the dry grass and igniting it immediately. The 2 men grappled, punching, clawing, fighting with raw desperation. Garrett was bigger, heavier. He got on top, raining down punches. Caleb blocked what he could, but he was fading, exhausted from hours of fighting. Eliza ran forward and, without thinking, without hesitating, she brought the rifle butt down on Garrett's head. Once. Twice. He slumped sideways, unconscious. Caleb shoved him off and staggered to his feet, gasping. Around them, the grass fire was spreading, flames licking toward the house. "We have to put it out!" Eliza shouted. They stamped and beat at the flames, using anything they could find. It was desperate, futile work, but somehow they got it under control, smothering the last of it just as Hank and Ben came running. "What the hell happened?" Hank demanded. "Garrett," Caleb said, pointing to the unconscious man. "Tie him up. We're taking him in." "Taking him where?" "To town. To the law. He's going to answer for what he did." Eliza looked around at the devastation. Bodies in the dirt, the house half destroyed, the barn gone, Davis dead. They'd won. Barely. But the cost had been brutal. She walked back to the house and sank down on the porch steps, every muscle screaming, hands shaking. Caleb came and sat beside her, his arm still bleeding from the bullet wound, his face battered and swollen. They sat together in the pre-dawn quiet, too exhausted to speak. Around them, the valley slowly lightened, the stars fading as the sun began its slow climb. "We did it," Eliza said finally. "Yeah. I didn't think we would." "Me neither." She looked at him, this man she'd married out of necessity, this stranger who'd become something else entirely. "What now?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand, his grip firm despite the exhaustion. "Now we rebuild," he said. "Together." Eliza held his hand and looked out at the ranch, broken, bloodied, but still standing. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she was home. The sun was fully up by the time they got Garrett secured in the back of a wagon, hands tied, a gag stuffed in his mouth to stop the threats he kept spitting at them. His face was swollen where Eliza had hit him, one eye nearly shut, but the hatred in the other burned clear and bright. Caleb ignored him. There wasn't anything Garrett could say now that mattered. Hank climbed up onto the wagon seat, reins in hand. "You sure about this? Taking him in, I mean. Might be smarter to just bury him out back with the others." Caleb shook his head. "No, he answers for this in front of the law. I want everyone to know what he did. Law's 3 days away. That's a long ride with a man like that tied up in back. Then we make the ride. Eliza stepped up beside Caleb, her rifle slung over her shoulder. She looked as worn down as he felt, face streaked with dirt and powder burns, clothes torn, eyes red-rimmed from smoke and exhaustion. But she was standing. That counted for something. I'm going with you, she said. Caleb turned to her. You should stay here, rest, help Ben and Cole clean up. Ben and Cole can manage. You're taking a man who tried to kill us all into custody. You need someone watching your back. Hank will be there. Hank's driving. That leaves you alone with Garrett, if something goes wrong. She met his eyes, her voice firm. I'm not asking, Caleb. I'm going. He wanted to argue, but he could see it wouldn't make a difference. Eliza had made up her mind, and when she did that, there was no moving her. He'd learned that much over the past weeks. All right, he said. But we leave in an hour. Get some food, clean up that cut on your arm, and pack light. She nodded and headed back toward the house. Caleb watched her go, then turned to Hank. Keep your rifle loaded. If Garrett tries anything at all, you put him down. Hank's expression was grim. Won't be a problem. They buried Davis before they left, out near the northern fence where the land rose slightly and you could see the whole valley. It wasn't a fancy grave, just a hole in the hard earth with a wooden marker Hank had carved with Davis's name and the year. No one said much. There wasn't much to say. Davis had come to work cattle and ended up dying in a gunfight. That was the frontier. That was the cost. Cole stood there with his arm in a sling, pale but steady. Ben stood beside him, hat in his hands. Eliza and Caleb stood together, and for a moment the only sound was the wind moving through the dry grass. He was a good man, Caleb said finally. Quiet, reliable. Didn't deserve what happened to him. None of us do, Ben said. But he went down fighting. That's something. They stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back to the house. There was work to do. There was always work to do. An hour later, Caleb, Eliza, and Hank set out for the territorial seat. Garrett trussed up in the wagon bed like a hog, ready for market. The road was rough, cutting through open country with little shelter and less water. They'd packed enough supplies for the 3-day ride, but it would be a hard journey. Caleb's arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, and every jolt of the wagon sent fresh pain shooting through his shoulder. Eliza rode beside the wagon on horseback, silent and watchful, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The first day passed without incident. They stopped twice to water the horses and once to let Garrett relieve himself, though Caleb kept a gun on him the whole time. Garrett didn't try anything, just glared with that one good eye and muttered curses under his breath. That night they made camp in a shallow canyon, building a small fire and taking turns on watch. Caleb took the first shift, sitting with his back against a rock, rifle across his knees. Eliza sat across from him, poking at the fire with a stick. You should sleep, Caleb said. So should you. I will. After. She tossed the stick into the flames and looked at him. How's the arm? Hurts, but it'll heal. You need to clean it again. Infection'll kill you faster than a bullet. I know. She pulled a canteen and a strip of cloth from her pack, then came over and knelt beside him. Let me see it. Caleb hesitated, then pulled his sleeve up. The wound was ugly, a ragged furrow across his bicep, crusted with dried blood and dirt. Eliza poured water over it, and Caleb hissed through his teeth. Sorry, she said. Just get it done. She worked quickly, cleaning the wound and wrapping it with the cloth. Her hands were steady, efficient, but there was something gentle in the way she tied the bandage, something that made Caleb's chest tighten. Where'd you learn to do this? He asked. Kansas. My mother was a midwife. She taught me how to stitch and clean wounds, said every woman should know how to keep people alive. Eliza sat back on her heels, looking at the bandage. I didn't think I'd be using it to patch up gunshot wounds, but here we are. Here we are, Caleb echoed. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Then Eliza spoke again, her voice quieter. Back there, during the fight, when Garrett had you on the ground, I thought he was going to kill you. He almost did. I didn't think. I just hit him. And I kept hitting him until he stopped moving. She looked down at her hands, and Caleb saw they were shaking slightly. I've never done that before. Hit someone like that, like I wanted them dead. You saved my life. I know, but it doesn't make it easier. Caleb reached out and covered her hand with his. You did what you had to do. Same as all of us. That's all any of us can do out here. Eliza looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Does it get easier? The killing? No, it just gets more familiar. She nodded slowly, then pulled her hand back and stood. I'll take second watch. Get some sleep. Caleb watched her walk to the edge of the camp and settle in with her rifle. He wanted to say something more, something that would take the weight off her shoulders, but he didn't know what. So he just lay down, pulled his blanket over himself, and closed his eyes. Sleep didn't come easy, but eventually it came. The second day was harder. The sun beat down relentless, and the water ran low faster than Caleb had expected. They rationed what they had, but by midday everyone was parched and irritable. Garrett, still gagged, made muffled noises from the back of the wagon, and Hank finally stopped and yanked the gag down. You got something to say? Say it quick. Garrett coughed, worked his jaw, then fixed Hank with a venomous stare. You're all dead. You know that, right? Even if you get me to the law, even if they lock me up, I've got friends, people who owe me. They'll come for you. Let them come, Hank said flatly. We've dealt with worse. You think you've won something here, but you haven't. You've just bought yourself a slower death. Caleb rode up beside the wagon, his face hard. You done? Garrett smiled, all teeth and malice. Not even close. Caleb nodded to Hank, who shoved the gag back in. Garrett's eyes blazed, but there was nothing he could do. They rode on. That night they camped near a dry riverbed. There was no water, so they went without. Eliza took first watch, and Caleb tried to sleep, but the pain in his arm kept him awake. Around midnight, he gave up and went to sit beside her. Can't sleep? She asked. Arm's bothering me. Let me check it. She unwrapped the bandage, and even in the dim light, Caleb could see the wound was inflamed, the edges red and angry. Eliza's expression tightened. It's infected. I know. We need to clean it again, properly this time. And you need to take it easy, let it heal. We're a day out from the territorial seat. I can manage. Caleb, I said I can manage. Eliza stared at him, frustration clear in her eyes. Then she sighed and started rewrapping the wound. You're stubborn. So are you. Yeah, but I'm smart enough to know when to ask for help. Caleb didn't respond to that. He just sat there while she finished the bandaging, then stood and walked back to his bedroll. But he didn't sleep. He just lay there, staring up at the stars, thinking about what Garrett had said, about friends, about people who owed him, about a slower death. The third day, they reached the territorial seat just before sunset. The town was bigger than Red Mesa. 2 main streets, a courthouse, a proper jail, and enough people that you couldn't know everyone by name. Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of the sheriff's office, and a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest came out to meet them. Help you folks? Caleb climbed down from the wagon, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured arm. I'm Caleb Vance. This is my wife, Eliza, and Hank Mercer. We've got a prisoner for you. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. What kind of prisoner? The kind that hired men to burn down my ranch and kill my crew. The sheriff walked to the back of the wagon and looked at Garrett, who glared back with pure hatred. Recognition flickered across the sheriff's face. That's Malcolm Garrett. He's got holdings all over the territory. You're saying he tried to kill you? I'm saying he did a hell of a lot more than try. He burned my barn, sent raiders to steal my cattle, and attacked my property with 20 armed men. One of my men is dead because of him. The sheriff scratched his jaw, clearly uncomfortable. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Vance. You got proof? I've got bodies buried on my land. I've got a ranch that's half destroyed, and I've got him. Caleb pointed at Garrett. He admitted it. Threatened me to my face. There are witnesses. The sheriff looked from Caleb to Eliza to Hank, then back to Garrett. Finally, he sighed. All right, bring him inside. We'll sort this out. They hauled Garrett into the jail and locked him in a cell. The whole time, Garrett said nothing, just watched Caleb with those cold, calculating eyes. Caleb met his gaze and didn't look away. After Garrett was secured, the sheriff led Caleb, Eliza, and Hank into his office and closed the door. Now, the sheriff said, sitting down behind his desk, tell me everything. Caleb did. He laid out the whole story, the marriage law, the threats, the raids, the fire, the final battle. Eliza and Hank filled in details where needed. The sheriff listened, taking notes, his expression growing grimmer with every word. When they finished, the sheriff set his pen down and leaned back in his chair. That's one hell of a story. It's the truth, Caleb said. I believe you. Problem is, Garrett's got money and influence. He's got lawyers who'll tie this up in court for months, maybe years. And even if we convict him, he's got friends who might come after you for putting him away. I know. So why'd you bring him in? Why not just shoot him and be done with it? Caleb glanced at Eliza, then back at the sheriff. Because I want people to know what he did. I want it on the record. I'm tired of men like him thinking they can take whatever they want just because they've got money. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. I'll make sure it gets documented, and I'll send word to the territorial judge. But you need to understand, this won't be quick, and it won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, Eliza said quietly. The sheriff smiled faintly. No, ma'am. I suppose it's not. They found rooms at a boarding house on the edge of town. Caleb insisted Eliza take one to herself while he and Hank shared another. That night, Caleb lay in the narrow bed listening to Hank snoring and tried to let the tension drain out of his body. They'd done it. They'd brought Garrett in. The rest was up to the law. But sleep still wouldn't come. His arm throbbed, his mind raced, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw Davis falling, saw the barn burning, saw Garrett's gun pointed at Eliza. Finally, he gave up and went downstairs. The boarding house had a small sitting room, and Eliza was there, sitting in a chair by the window, looking out at the dark street. Can't sleep either? She asked without turning. No. He sat down in the chair beside her. For a while they just sat in silence, watching the occasional person pass by outside. What happens now? Eliza asked eventually. We go back. Rebuild. Try to make the ranch work again. And if Garrett's people come for us, then we deal with it, same as we dealt with him. She turned to look at him, her expression serious. Caleb, we can't keep fighting forever. Sooner or later we'll lose. Maybe. But what's the alternative? Give up? Walk away? No, I'm not saying that. She hesitated, searching for the right words. I'm saying we need to be smarter. Build alliances. Make friends. Show people we're not just some isolated ranch they can pick off whenever they want. Caleb frowned. What kind of alliances? Other ranchers. The town. People who've got as much to lose as we do if men like Garrett are allowed to operate without consequence. She leaned forward. We stood our ground and we won. That means something. People will have heard about it by now. We use that. We show them we're not victims. We're survivors. Caleb considered that. It made sense. More sense than he wanted to admit. You've been thinking about this. I've had a lot of time to think. He nodded slowly. All right, we'll try it your way. When we get back, we reach out. See who's willing to stand with us. Good. She stood, stretching slightly. Now get some sleep. You look like hell. Thanks. She smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. You're welcome. Caleb watched her walk back upstairs, then sat there a while longer, thinking. Eliza was right. They couldn't keep fighting alone. If they were going to survive, if they were going to build something that lasted, they needed more than just grit and stubbornness. They needed community. They needed people. The thought scared him more than he expected. He'd spent so long keeping everyone at arm's length, trusting no one, needing no one. But Eliza had changed that. She'd proven that partnership, real partnership, was stronger than isolation. He just hoped it would be enough. The next morning, they prepared to ride back. The sheriff came by the boarding house to see them off. Judge will be here in 2 weeks, he said. I'll make sure he hears the case, and I'll keep Garrett locked up tight until then. Appreciate it, Caleb said. The sheriff hesitated, then pulled Caleb aside. Word of advice? Watch your back. Garrett's got a brother. Runs operations out east. If he hears about this, he might come looking for payback. Caleb's stomach sank. You're just telling me this now? Didn't want to worry you before, but you should know what you're up against. How bad is the brother? Worse than Malcolm, meaner, and he doesn't care about the law. Caleb nodded grimly. Thanks for the warning. They rode out an hour later, the town disappearing behind them as they headed back toward the ranch. The journey was quieter this time, everyone lost in their own thoughts. Hank drove the wagon, Eliza rode alongside, and Caleb brought up the rear, his mind churning. On the second day, Eliza dropped back to ride beside him. You've been quiet, she said. Just thinking. About? Garrett's brother. She frowned. What about him? Caleb told her what the sheriff had said. Eliza's expression darkened. Of course there's a brother, because things weren't complicated enough already. Yeah. So what do we do? What we've been doing. Stay alert, be ready, and hope he doesn't come. And if he does? Caleb looked at her and his voice was flat and certain. Then we kill him too. Eliza didn't flinch. She just nodded. All right then. They rode in silence for a while longer. Then Eliza spoke again, her tone shifting to something lighter. You know, when I got on that coach to come out here, I thought my life was over. Thought I'd be stuck in some miserable situation with a man who resented me, living out my days cooking and cleaning and nothing more. And now? Now I've killed men, fought off raiders, and helped bring down someone who thought he was untouchable. She shook her head, almost laughing. Not exactly what I expected. Regret it? She was quiet for a moment, considering. No, I don't. Why not? Because for the first time in my life, I matter. What I do matters. I'm not just existing. I'm fighting for something. She looked at him. Fighting for someone. Caleb felt that tightness in his chest again, the crack widening. Eliza, you don't have to say anything, she said quickly. I just wanted you to know. They rode on, the space between them feeling smaller than it ever had. When they finally reached the ranch 3 days later, the sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of gold and red. The place looked rough, the barn still a blackened ruin, the house patched but scarred, evidence of the battle everywhere you looked. But it was standing, and so were they. Ben and Cole came out to meet them, both looking better than when they'd left. Cole's arm was still in a sling, but he was moving easier. Ben had a fresh bandage around his ribs, but seemed steady enough. How'd it go? Ben asked. Garrett's locked up, Caleb said. Judge will hear the case in 2 weeks. And then? And then we see if justice actually means something out here. Ben nodded. Fair enough. We've been working on the house. Got most of the damage repaired. Barn's going to take longer. We'll handle it, Eliza said. One thing at a time. That night, they gathered in the kitchen. All of them, exhausted but alive. Eliza cooked a simple meal, and they ate together, talking quietly about what came next. Rebuilding, reinforcing, reaching out to neighbors, planning for the future. When the others drifted off to bed, Caleb and Eliza stayed at the table, the lamps burning low. You meant what you said, Caleb said, about fighting for someone. I did. I'm not good at this, at letting people in. I know, but I want to try. With you. Eliza looked at him, and something shifted in her expression, something soft and open and real. Then try. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers laced through his, and they sat there in the quiet, two people who'd started as strangers and become something else entirely. Something stronger, something that just might last. Outside, the wind moved through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and dust and possibility. The fight wasn't over. It might never be over. But they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of hard work and careful watching. Caleb and his crew rebuilt what they could, patching walls, replacing fence posts, clearing debris from the barn site. The work was backbreaking, but it gave them something to focus on besides the waiting. Because they were waiting for news from the territorial seat, for Garrett's brother to show up, for the next disaster to land on them. Eliza threw herself into the work with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She hauled lumber, hammered nails, and spent long hours in the rebuilt kitchen preparing meals for the crew. But Caleb noticed the way she'd pause sometimes, hand on her rifle, eyes scanning the horizon. She was waiting too. On the 5th day after their return, a rider came up the road, a young man on a sorrel mare carrying a leather satchel. Caleb met him at the gate, hand resting on his pistol. Help you? The rider tipped his hat. Looking for Caleb Vance. You found him. Got a message for you from Sheriff Daniels at the territorial seat. He pulled an envelope from the satchel and handed it down. Caleb opened it and read quickly. When he finished, he looked up at the rider. When's the trial? 4 days from now. Sheriff says you'll want to be there. Garrett's got himself a lawyer from back east. Real sharp talker, apparently. I'll be there. The rider nodded and turned his horse. Good luck, Mr. Vance. For what it's worth, folks are talking about what you did. Standing up to Garrett like that, there's more than a few who are glad someone finally did. Caleb watched him ride off, then walked back to the house where Eliza was waiting on the porch. Trial's in 4 days, he said. You going? Have to. Need to testify. Then I'm coming with you. Eliza, don't start. You think I'm letting you ride back there alone? After everything? She crossed her arms. We do this together. That's how it works now. Caleb wanted to argue, but he knew it was pointless. And truth be told, he didn't want to go alone. Having her there made him feel steadier, like he could face whatever came next. All right, he said. We leave tomorrow morning. They made the journey faster this time, pushing the horses hard. When they reached the territorial seat, the town was buzzing with activity. Word of the trial had spread, and people had come from all over to see Malcolm Garrett face justice. The courthouse steps were packed with ranchers, merchants, and working people, all of them waiting to see if the law would actually hold a rich man accountable. Caleb and Eliza pushed through the crowd and into the courthouse. Sheriff Daniels met them inside, looking harried. Glad you made it. Garrett's lawyer's been making noise all morning, talking about lack of evidence, unreliable witnesses, all that garbage. What do we need to do? Caleb asked. Just tell the truth. Let the judge see what kind of man Garrett is. The sheriff paused. Fair warning, though, the judge is Hamilton Burke. He's fair, but he's also a stickler for procedure. You'll need to keep your temper in check. I can manage that? Can you? The sheriff looked doubtful. Because Garrett's lawyer is going to try to rile you up, make you look like a hothead who overreacted. Don't give him the satisfaction. Caleb nodded tightly. Understood. The courtroom was packed when they entered. Garrett sat at the defendant's table in a clean suit, his bruises faded but still visible. Beside him sat his lawyer, a thin man with wire spectacles and a mouth that looked permanently pursed in disapproval. When Garrett saw Caleb, his lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Judge Burke entered, and everyone stood. He was an older man, gray-haired and stern-faced, with eyes that missed nothing. He settled into his chair and banged the gavel once. Court is in session. Let's proceed. The prosecution went first, laying out the charges: arson, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit theft, destruction of property. They called Caleb to the stand, and he told his story again, every detail, keeping his voice steady and his eyes on the judge. When he finished, Garrett's lawyer stood and approached the witness stand with a smile that made Caleb's skin crawl. Mr. Vance, you've painted quite a dramatic picture here. A wealthy man orchestrating raids, burning buildings, attempting to murder you and your crew. It all sounds very theatrical. It's what happened. Is it? Or is it possible you've embellished events to cover up your own illegal activities? Caleb's jaw tightened. What illegal activities? Rustling, for one. You admitted under oath that you stole cattle belonging to Mr. Garrett. I took back what his men were using to pressure me. That's not rustling. Isn't it? The lawyer paced. You took livestock that didn't belong to you. You ambushed working drovers just trying to do their jobs. And when Mr. Garrett attempted to recover his property, you responded with lethal force. That's not what happened. Then enlighten us, Mr. Vance. What did happen? Caleb took a breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Garrett wanted my land. When the marriage law didn't work, he sent men to burn me out. When that didn't work, he came himself with 20 riders to finish the job. We defended ourselves. That's all. Defended yourselves by killing 9 men? We did what we had to do to survive. The lawyer smiled thinly. Or perhaps you're simply a violent man who overreacted to a business dispute and is now trying to justify murder. Objection, the prosecutor said, standing. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Burke said. Counsel, stick to questions. The lawyer nodded, but his point was made. He spent another 20 minutes trying to poke holes in Caleb's testimony, twisting his words, making him sound like a paranoid aggressor. By the time Caleb stepped down, he was shaking with suppressed anger. Eliza was called next. She walked to the stand with her head high, and when she was sworn in, her voice was clear and steady. The prosecutor asked her to describe what she'd witnessed. Eliza laid it out methodically. The raids, the fire, the final assault. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She just told the truth. When Garrett's lawyer stood to cross-examine, his smile was sharper. Mrs. Vance, you arrived in Red Mesa Valley just weeks before these alleged events. Is that correct? Yes. And you married Mr. Vance as part of a legal arrangement to help him keep his land? That's correct. So it's fair to say you have a vested interest in painting Mr. Garrett as the villain here. After all, if your husband loses his land, you lose your home. Eliza's eyes hardened. I have an interest in telling the truth, which is what I'm doing. Is it? Or are you simply supporting your husband's version of events because you're dependent on him? I'm not dependent on anyone, Eliza said coldly. And I'm not lying. Everything I've said is exactly what happened. Yet you have no proof beyond your word. No documents, no independent witnesses, just the testimony of people who all stand to benefit from Mr. Garrett's conviction. We have the bodies of the men he sent to kill us. We have a burned barn. We have bullet holes in our walls. If that's not proof, I don't know what is. The lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd expected her to crack under pressure, but Eliza just stared him down, unflinching. No further questions, he muttered. Hank and Ben testified after her, corroborating everything. By the time the prosecution rested, the evidence was overwhelming, but Garrett's lawyer was good. He spun a counter-narrative that Caleb was a desperate man who'd overreacted to legitimate business pressure, that Garrett had only sent men to recover stolen property, that the deaths were tragic but justified self-defense on Garrett's part. It was garbage, but it was persuasive garbage. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. On the charge of arson, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, some cursed, some just sat in stunned silence. Caleb felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Guilty on 2 counts, but not on the one that mattered most. Judge Burke banged his gavel repeatedly until the room quieted. Mr. Garrett, you've been convicted of serious crimes. I sentence you to 5 years in the territorial prison and a fine of $10,000 to be paid to Mr. Vance as restitution for damages. In addition, all claims you hold on land adjacent to the Vance property are hereby nullified. Garrett's face went purple with rage, but the bailiffs were already hauling him away. As he passed Caleb, he leaned in close. My brother will hear about this, and when he does, you're a dead man. Caleb met his eyes. Let him come. Outside the courthouse, people swarmed Caleb and Eliza, shaking their hands, clapping them on the back, thanking them for standing up to Garrett. It was overwhelming, and Caleb didn't know how to handle it. But Eliza took it in stride, smiling and nodding and accepting the gratitude with grace. An older rancher named Thomas Keene pushed through the crowd and extended his hand to Caleb. What you did took guts. Garrett's been squeezing people out for years, and no one had the spine to stop him. You did. That means something. Just trying to keep what's mine, Caleb said. Maybe. But you showed the rest of us it's possible to fight back and win. Keene glanced around at the crowd. We've been talking. Bunch of us ranchers. We're thinking it's time we organized, helped each other instead of letting men like Garrett pick us off one by one. You interested? Caleb looked at Eliza, who gave him a small nod. Then he turned back to Keene and shook his hand. Yeah, I'm interested. They stayed in town one more night, then headed back to the ranch. The ride was quieter this time, both of them processing what had happened. Not guilty on attempted murder, Caleb said eventually. That sticks in my throat. But guilty on the others, and 5 years in prison, plus the fine. Eliza glanced at him. That's more than most people thought we'd get. Maybe, but Garrett was right about one thing. His brother's going to come. Then we'll deal with him when he does. You sound so sure. I am. She looked at him, her expression fierce. We've survived everything else. We'll survive this too. Caleb wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. They'd won a battle, maybe 2, but the war wasn't over. It might never be over. When they reached the ranch, it was late afternoon, the sun painting the valley in warm light. Ben and Cole were out working on the new barn frame, and the sound of hammering carried across the open ground. It looked almost peaceful, but that peace shattered a week later when a rider came up the road at full gallop. Caleb was out mending fence when he saw the dust cloud and immediately dropped his tools and ran for his rifle. By the time the rider reached the house, everyone was armed and ready. The rider was Thomas Keene's son, a boy no more than 17, his face pale and frightened. Mr. Vance, you gotta come quick." Caleb grabbed the horse's bridle. "Slow down! What happened?" "It's my father, and the Richardsons and the Bowmans. Someone hit all three ranches last night, burned barns, killed livestock, beat my father half to death. They left a message, said it's payback for what happened to Malcolm Garrett." Caleb's blood ran cold. "How many were there?" "My father said at least a dozen, maybe more. They came out of nowhere, did their damage, and rode off before anyone could fight back." "Where are they now?" "Don't know, but Mr. Vance," the boy's voice cracked. "They said you're next, said they're coming to finish what Malcolm started." Caleb looked at Eliza, then at Hank and the others. Everyone's face showed the same grim understanding. This was it, the reckoning they'd been waiting for. "Get inside," Caleb said. "Everyone, now." They gathered in the main room, weapons loaded, windows barricaded. Caleb stood at the head of the table, looking at the faces around him. Eliza, Hank, Ben, Cole, and now the Keen boy, all of them scared but determined. "We've got two choices," Caleb said. "We can ford up here and wait for them to come, or we can take the fight to them." "How?" Ben asked. "We don't even know where they are, but we know where they're going. They hit Keen, Richardson, and Bowman. We're next on the list." Caleb pointed at the map spread on the table. "There's only 3 routes they can take to reach us. We pick one, set an ambush, and hit them before they get here." "And if we pick wrong?" Cole asked. "Then we fall back and defend here. But at least we'll have tried." Eliza studied the map, her mind working. "The southern route. It's the fastest and gives the most cover. If I were planning an attack, that's what I'd use." "Then that's where we go," Caleb said. He looked around the table. "I'm not ordering anyone to come. This is volunteer only. If you want to stay here, I understand." No one moved. Then Hank stood. "I'm in." "Me too," Ben said. Cole nodded. "Same." The Keen boy, still shaking, stood as well. "My father's in a bad way. If there's a chance to stop these bastards, I want to take it." Caleb looked at Eliza. She met his eyes and stood without hesitation. "Let's finish this." They rode out an hour before sunset, 6 riders moving fast across the valley toward the southern pass. It was narrow canyon country, all steep walls and loose rock, perfect for an ambush. They found a spot where the trail bottomed out between 2 ridges and set up positions. Eliza and Ben took the high ground on one side. Hank and Cole took the other. Caleb and the Keen boy stayed low, ready to block the trail if anyone tried to run. Then they waited. Night fell. The temperature dropped. Caleb's injured arm ached in the cold, but he ignored it. Beside him, young Keen fidgeted nervously. "You ever done this before?" Caleb asked quietly. "Ambushed someone?" "No, sir." "You scared?" "Terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Just remember, when it starts, don't think. Just shoot. Thinking will get you killed." The boy nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. They came just after midnight. A long column of riders, maybe 15 strong, moving quietly through the canyon. Caleb recognized the man at the front immediately. He looked like Malcolm Garrett, but harder, meaner, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. Daniel Garrett, the brother. Caleb waited until they were fully committed to the pass. No room to maneuver. Then he whistled. The canyon erupted in gunfire. Eliza and Ben poured shots down from above, and riders fell from their saddles, horses screaming. Hank and Cole opened up from the other side, cutting off the retreat. The Garrett gang tried to scatter, but there was nowhere to go. Daniel Garrett roared orders, trying to rally his men, but the chaos was too much. Some tried to fight back, firing blindly into the darkness. Others just ran. Caleb stepped into the trail and fired, dropping 2 men. The Keen boy fired beside him, his shot going wide but forcing another rider to veer off course and crash into the canyon wall. Daniel Garrett saw Caleb and spurred his horse directly at him, pistol raised. Caleb fired, but his shot went wide. Garrett fired back and the bullet whined past Caleb's ear. Then Eliza's rifle cracked from above, and Garrett's horse went down, throwing him hard into the dirt. He rolled, came up firing, and Caleb shot him twice in the chest. Garrett staggered, looked down at the blood spreading across his shirt, then fell face first into the dust. The fight ended as suddenly as it had started. Half of Garrett's men were dead or wounded. The rest had fled into the night. Caleb walked to Daniel Garrett's body and knelt beside it. The man was still breathing, barely. Garrett's eyes found Caleb's. You killed my brother. Your brother tried to kill me first. He was all I had. Then you should have told him to leave well enough alone. Garrett coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. Doesn't matter. Someone else will come. Someone always comes. Let them, Caleb said quietly. I'll be ready. Daniel Garrett tried to say something else, but the words died in his throat. His eyes went glassy, and he stopped breathing. Caleb stood, suddenly exhausted, every muscle aching. Around him, his crew was checking the bodies, gathering weapons, making sure no one was playing dead. The keen boy stood off to the side, staring at the carnage, looking like he might be sick. Eliza climbed down from the ridge and came to Caleb's side. It's over. For now. No. She turned him to face her. It's over. The Garretts are dead. Their operation is broken. No one else is coming. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because we didn't just survive, Caleb. We won. And everyone knows it now. She gestured to the canyon, to the bodies, to the evidence of their victory. This is the end. Caleb wanted to argue, but looking at her, this woman who'd faced down killers, who'd stood beside him through hell and refused to break, he realized she was right. It was over. Not because there'd never be another threat, but because they'd proven they could face whatever came and win. They rode back to the ranch as the sun rose, exhausted but alive. Word of the ambush spread fast, carried by the survivors who'd fled. Within days, people from all over the valley came to the ranch, offering help, bringing supplies, pledging support. The Ranchers' Alliance that Thomas Keene had proposed became a reality, with Caleb and Eliza at its center. The barn was rebuilt in a week, raised by crews from a dozen different ranches. The house was repaired and expanded. Fences were reinforced. The cattle herd grew as neighbors contributed stock to help them rebuild. And through it all, Caleb and Eliza worked side by side, no longer strangers forced together by law, but partners by choice. One evening, a month after the ambush, they stood together on the North Ridge watching the sunset. The valley below was green and alive, the cattle grazing peacefully, smoke rising from chimneys of neighboring ranches visible in the distance. You ever think about that first day? Eliza asked. When you picked me out of that registry? Sometimes. What do you think now? Caleb was quiet for a moment, then said, I think it was the best decision I ever made. Eliza smiled. Even though I've been nothing but trouble? Especially because of that. He turned to face her. You changed everything. This place, me, what's possible. I don't know who I'd be without you, and I don't want to find out. She stepped closer, and for the first time since they'd met, Caleb pulled her into his arms. She leaned into him, and they stood there as the sun sank lower, two people who'd started with nothing and built something real. What happens now? Eliza asked eventually. We keep going, keep building, keep fighting when we have to. Together? Together. She looked up at him, and he saw everything in her eyes, the strength, the fire, the vulnerability she let so few people see. And he realized that what they had wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was theirs, earned through blood and sweat and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. I love you, Caleb said. The words felt strange in his mouth, unfamiliar, but true. Eliza's eyes widened slightly, then softened. I love you too. They stood there as darkness fell, holding each other, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, but also knowing they'd face them together, and that made all the difference. Months passed. The ranch thrived. The alliance of ranchers grew stronger, creating a network of mutual support that made it harder for men like the Garretts to operate. Caleb became a leader in the valley, respected not just for what he'd survived, but for his willingness to help others. Eliza became known as someone who could be counted on. Tough, smart, fair. They never forgot Davis, or the cost of what they'd won. His grave on the northern hill was tended regularly, a reminder that freedom came with a price. But they also didn't let the past define them. They built a future instead. Together. 1 year after the trial, Eliza discovered she was pregnant. When she told Caleb, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so he did both. They stood in the kitchen where they'd planned so many battles, and now they were planning something else entirely. A life. A family. You scared? Eliza asked. Terrified. Me too. He took her hands. but we'll figure it out. Same as everything else. Together? Together. The baby came in the spring, a girl with Eliza's eyes and Caleb's stubborn streak. They named her Sarah, after Caleb's mother, the woman who'd left but whose absence had shaped so much of who he'd become. It felt right somehow, a way of reclaiming that pain and turning it into something good. Holding his daughter for the first time, Caleb understood something he'd never quite grasped before. That strength wasn't about standing alone, it was about knowing who you could lean on. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. That love, real love, wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you built, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. He looked at Eliza, exhausted and radiant, cradling Sarah in her arms, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would do it all again. Every fight, every fear, every moment of doubt, he'd walk through all of it again if it meant ending up here. Because this was what mattered. Not the land, not the pride, not the victory over the Garretts. This, family, partnership, the knowledge that you weren't facing the world alone. Years later, when Sarah was old enough to understand, Caleb would tell her the story. Not the sanitized version, but the truth. About how he and her mother had started as strangers, forced together by circumstance. About the violence they'd faced and the choices they'd made. About the people they'd lost and the community they'd built. And he'd tell her the most important lesson he'd learned, that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances. That strength isn't measured by what you can do alone, but by who you choose to stand with. That dignity isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up every single time. But for now, in this moment, Caleb just held his wife and daughter close and let himself feel something he'd never thought possible. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, not the end of hardship, just the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that would be enough. The sun set over Red Mesa Valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The ranch stood solid and strong, rebuilt better than before. Smoke rose from the chimney, cattle grazed in the distance. And inside the house, a family gathered around the table, scarred, imperfect, but unbroken. This was the frontier, hard and unforgiving and beautiful. It took everything from you and demanded more. But if you were willing to fight for it, if you were willing to bleed for it, if you found the right people to stand beside, then it gave back something worth having. A home, a purpose, a life. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for.